Great. Well, I'm really happy to be here to tell you about an exciting project that BIFHSGO is undertaking. I'm going to describe the project to you with the goal of two goals in mind. One is to perhaps convince you to join us doing it, but also perhaps to give you a few tips if you're researching your own World War I soldiers. Before I start, I would like to introduce the other people on the team who are working on bios already. And ask them to stand so that if you have questions during the break, Lynn, you can just stay standing. You have any questions, you can ask them. Lynn Willoughby. Linda Gibson, who I know is not here today. She's away, unfortunately. Heather Carmody, who is here. Glenn Wright, who is here. David Agard, I don't think he's here. He did some biographies for us a few years ago. He's not currently working with us. And Jean Kitchen, who I don't think has arrived yet, she said she'd be a little late, our long-suffering editor. I mean, she doesn't write bios, but without her, we wouldn't be able to produce the kind of quality that we do for the BIFHSGO website. So that's our team. And by the way, electronic copies of these slides will be or are available on the members-only webpage of our website. So you can look them up there if you want an electronic copy. So what is the first Canadian Casualty Clearing Station? It was part of the Canadian Army Medical Corps. It was located usually between the front first aid posts, field ambulances, and the hospitals. It was moved around during the war, but it was usually located near a transportation corridor so that soldiers could be evacuated. The chaplains there maintained records of deaths at the CCCS. And the record that we have dates from early 1916 to March of 1919 when the unit was disbanded and returned to Canada. The station provided medical care to any soldiers in the area. The vast majority of the records we have are British soldiers, but there are quite a few Canadians. There are a few other nationalities as well, including some Germans and towards the end of the war, Serbian soldiers. So what's our project? Well, first of all, Glenn Wright found the diaries at the Library and Archives Canada quite a few years ago now, I think. But we've been working on them for a while. As Andrea mentioned, we transcribed all the records, and they are now available on our website. If you look under the Research tab, you'll find it, the Canadian Casualty Clearing Station, and the 879 soldiers. There's an entry for each one, and we provide the basic information that the chaplains provided in the journal. After we finished the transcription, Dave Cross and I thought it would be kind of a fun centenary project to write biographies for each of the soldiers. This came about because in the course of transcribing them, we actually had to look some up and we realized that there was information available, so we just kind of kept going. We've now completed just over 400 bios of the 879 soldiers who are listed in the journal. And if you look on the website, you can click through and you'll find a little icon that tells you that there's a biography and you can look through. So what do we do? Well, most family researchers start with a family member and then look for their military service. We're doing it the other way around. We have a military record and we are seeking to expand that record to other records and to find his family. So it's a different twist on doing it, but it's an interesting research conundrum to do it that way sometimes. We rely on the basic databases that most people use, so Find My Past Ancestry, Commonwealth War Graves Commission, Library and Archives Canada, the General Register Office, etc. But we've also developed a long list of World War I specific resources. And that document, 9-page document, is what we have compiled over the years of working on biographies, will also be available with these slides on the members-only webpage. So if you would like to look at that and see if there's anybody that will help you, you're welcome to take that. The first thing we have to do is confirm the soldier's identity. The details that are available in the journal vary from chaplain to chaplain, but as a minimum, they include rank, name, regimental number, and date of death. Towards the end, the chaplains put quite a bit more information in. Some of them had the date he was admitted, his wounds, burial information, next of kin, including where the address of the next of kin. However, there are a lot of mistakes on the records. There are mistakes in their names, in the regimental numbers, even in the dates of death. So sometimes, I mean, we can easily imagine how this happened. I think it's hard to imagine how difficult the working conditions for the chaplain must have been and how busy they were. You just need to look at the war diaries from the station to realize just how many people were admitted, died, and left during the course of a day. So our first task then is to confirm the information that we have from the journal. And the Commonwealth War Graves site is probably the best place to confirm the basic data: name, unit, serial number. And it also includes, fortunately, sometimes the identity of the next of kin. So that's a very useful, two useful sites for us. Then for Canadian soldiers, as you all know, we're really lucky because the Library and Archives Canada has now almost finished, the letter TI, I think, digitizing the Canadian World War I service records. And that's an invaluable source, obviously, of information about the soldier. If not, and some of the earlier bios that we did, the records were not available. And so if you look at them, you might hit on one where the service file's not been available, and we could probably go back and redo them now that there's so much more information available. For the British records, it's not quite so easy because, as you probably know, about 60% of the World War I service files were destroyed in bombing in World War II. However, there are a couple of other sources that are very valuable. One, obviously, is the list of soldiers who died in World War I. That will tell you very often where he enlisted, sometimes where he was born. So that will give you another lead into finding more information. The medal records are useful, obviously, for the medals, but also if he enlisted early, it will tell you when he went to the front. So that's, again, another piece of information about his military service. And finally, something that's become available in the last, I would say, 2 years, is records that are available on Ancestry called soldiers' effects. By effects, what they mean is the money that was owing to the soldier from the army upon his death. But it has the huge advantage of listing the kin to whom that money was sent. And that's a very valuable way of finding the next of kin for these soldiers if you haven't already found it. It also, because it includes the gratuity payment that he got, there's a calculator that allows you to take the gratuity payment based on his date of death, calculate when he enlisted, approximately within a month or so. So that's also another useful piece of information in terms of trying to supplement his military records. Then the next big leap is to build on that information to try and find the soldier's family. So hopefully in some of the military records, we will have found a next of kin or at least a place of birth and enlistment. And from there, we just search the standard records, census records, births, marriages, deaths, to try and identify and confirm his family, his birth family. Something that's also become available very, very recently, was first available on the General Register Office and now is available on Find My Past and Ancestry, is the ability to find the maiden name for British births before 1912. This means that if a child was born between and died between two census records, you're still possible to find them. So what we do is once we've found the soldier's birth on one of these records and we know his mother's maiden name, we can find very often the marriage of his parents and subsequently any other siblings that were born. Now, isn't always quite so simple, but it's a huge advantage. And under Find My Past and Ancestry, you can now search on the maiden name, which you can't do on the General Record Office. However, having said all that, some common names are really difficult to trace. I've kind of given up on the Joneses in Wales. And the Joneses, whose mother's name was also Jones, there are just too many options. There are too many possibilities for his birth family to be able to say anything. Also particularly challenging are, and I'll come to this again later, are soldiers who married after the census of 1911 because their wife is showing up as their next of kin in all the records, and there's no link back to his birth family. So they're sometimes very difficult to find the birth family of those soldiers. The next task we take on is to look for the Army unit records. And this is to provide information for the context of the soldier's death. So we're looking two main records. One is the unit war diaries and the regimental histories. Now, unit war diaries for Canadian soldiers are available through LAC. For British soldiers, some of them are available on Ancestry. Some of them are available from the National Archives. And they're sometimes difficult to find, but when you do find them, you can look for the period in which your soldier died. And what we're doing is not trying to trace the whole history of his military service, because that would be really a lot of work and difficult. We're just looking at that period in which he was injured and died. Now, other ranks, and the most of our soldiers are privates, are not often mentioned in the war diaries, but if you can find, for example, that on a given day there was a major gas attack and 2 other ranks, non-officer soldiers, were injured, and your soldier was admitted to the station that day with gas poisoning, it allows us to say something like, he may have been one of the 2 soldiers who was injured in the gas attack. It's not conclusive, but at least it allows a little bit more narrative around his service. Then we're looking for general background information. So we're taking leads from anything that we've found to date. So one of them is family context, looking at the census records, what were the occupation of his parents, if they lived in a particular town in which he worked, the parents worked in the major industry of the town. We're able to talk a little bit about textile industry in given place. So just providing a little bit more context for where the family lived and what they did. We also look for the records of any siblings' First World War service. Sometimes a sibling's service record will be available even if the soldier's wasn't. So that obviously provides more information about the family and, again, connections to the family. Now, we also do tend to include a short summary of the sibling service in the soldier's biography. Leads us to a lot of interesting conclusions or comments about the number of children in any one family who might have died in World War I. So it's just another aspect of the family life. We look for images, and these really make for a very interesting bio. But we're also increasingly conscious of copyright issues, so we're also struggling with getting access to use them. People always grant us access when we manage to contact them, but it's something we're just very aware of. Newspaper stories, we're looking for articles about the family, things they were engaged in, volunteer activities before their enlistment. Very much more likely to find them, I think, in local areas than it is in large urban areas. But in local areas, you can find local newspapers that report on social events. We're also looking for family stories. And here, if we haven't found anything otherwise, we try and contact people through their ancestry trees. Now, there are a couple of things we do first. One is make sure the tree is fairly complete. Make sure the tree is not absolutely full of mistakes, because sometimes they are, and there's no point in talking to people because they believe they're right, it doesn't matter what you say. But also, when we do contact them, we also look to see people who are regular users or fairly recent users on Ancestry, because if they haven't been on for a couple of years, they're probably not very interested. So when you've met those conditions, we try contacting them and saying, these archives, these journals exist. They may be, for British soldiers, the best source of information the family has on the soldier's injuries, because that's not recorded elsewhere if there's no service file. So we're providing them with that information and asking them if they want to contribute to the biography. A lot never respond. A lot write back and say, I can't help you. He was the great uncle of my first wife's cousin, and I haven't a clue. And at that point, you know more about the soldier than he does. But a few write back, and you hit upon great nieces, great nephews, grandchildren, and without exception, they are really pleased that we're doing this project. And they say to us that they're glad that their ancestry is being honored. They contribute with family stories, with pictures, and you'll find some of those are some of our most interesting biographies on the website. Then we write the biography, and this is, if you like writing, is kind of one of the fun parts. The researching is fun too. We want to take and create a story out of facts. So we're not just creating a list of he was born, he died, he married, and so on. We're trying to create a story, try and find a hook, something to make this an interesting biography. Each of the biographers covers most of this information, but we all weave it together in different ways, so that sometimes you get tired of your own writing, so you change it up just to keep yourself interested. But we try and make it into an interesting story, something that reads well. And then we finalize the biography, and I have to say this is probably the more tedious part. We use a format, a word template, and we've agreed on certain project style policies, which Jean really helps us to enforce on ourselves. Spelling, common look, common language, and Jean is very, very good at reviewing the material and coming back to us with comments. Then we have to finalize the references, and we use endnotes and check the URLs, and that's a tedious process of making sure that the URL you put in actually works. Um, and the reason for all that is that we are really conscious that we are writing about somebody else's family. And we want to make absolutely certain that we can substantiate every single fact that we put in that biography. So we're not making anything up. If we have any doubts about something, we might use words like possibly, probably, maybe, if we can't be absolutely 100% certain, but 99.9. But we really want to make sure that these are absolutely factual. We have never yet had someone come back to us and say that we made a mistake. They'll come back and say, we've had a couple of people write to us and say, I can give you more information, but not that the information we had was wrong. Then they go to Jean for copy editing, and she does a painstaking review of the language, the spelling, the format. She doesn't check facts, but she's very good at identifying if something is inconsistent or isn't clear. She'll come back to us, and then we can check the facts and make sure that we've got it right. Each biographer addresses his or her own comments, does what we call the metadata, which is attaching tags to the file that make it easier once it's posted to find in web searches. And they send it to me for final formatting, turning it into a PDF and posting it on the website. And it's linked in the website to the soldier's entry. So just before I finish up, I wanted to talk to you about just a few interesting cases because we all get hooked into these stories. Cases can be particularly interesting for two reasons. One is because of the research process, because it was something that was challenging or that we learned from, or because of the soldier's story itself. So I'm just going to mention a couple to you, and if you want, you can look the details up on the website. McMaster was one of the early ones that one of the biographers did, and what we discovered here is the interesting use or interchangeability of first names. He was a soldier from Cape Breton of Scottish descent, and we learned that, for example, Daniel and Donald were the same person, Jean, Janet, and Jane were all the same person. And I'm sure this is something that you've all discovered in your own research, but it was just a little eye opener for us in terms of this family. Fletcher was a Canadian soldier. I couldn't find anything on his family. I was just about to consign him to the two-page bog standard, two-paragraph biography from what I had on the chaplain's journal when I just plopped his name into Google. And up popped a biography of his brother who had had a long time service in the RCMP. And that gave me information on the family. It also gave me a contact with his great nephew, who has been tremendous and provided a lot of family information, a lot of explanation of the problems, and I'll explain my problem in a minute, and pictures. And that biography has been actually featured in ACR as well. The reason I couldn't find any information was that his father changed the family name, his two brothers then changed the family name, and the children were registered under the mother's second husband's name for most of the census records. So I did feel a little bit vindicated in that I hadn't found anything on this poor fellow until his great nephew stepped up to the plate. Jones is an ongoing case, and I'll tell you about it. You won't find him on the website yet because I haven't come to the conclusion. He was a Welsh soldier living in Lancashire when he enlisted. He married in Lancashire, and I found his wife, and I found I believe he had children. But I worked through to find his birth family, and I thought I'd found them, and everything seemed to line up. But there was one other that was just close, but I wasn't certain. So I had somebody else look at it, start the research from the beginning, came to the same conclusions, and then we found on the website of the St. Helens Lancashire's memorial website, the soldier plus the same census records, the same family as I thought, oh, I must have got it right. But I always use every piece of information available. Even if I'm not going to put it in the biography, I still follow it up. So I found one of his brothers had an unusual Christian name, which made it possible to find his death record. He died in 1925, and I found the probate of his will, which is great, confirms the family. I looked at it. Probate was awarded to his sister and brother. Great. The sister, I'd found her in the census records. I'd found her married name, everything all lined up. The only problem is the brother was the soldier. So this means that he was awarded probate for the will of his brother 7 or 8 years after he died. Not likely. So now I'm back to square one. I've contacted the people at the memorial site in St. Helens, Lancashire to say, do you have any family in the neighborhood who can confirm that this was the right soldier and the right family? Because if not, there's that little bell that's going off in my head saying, I'm not sure that I've got the right family. So even though I had no intention of putting the probate of his brother's will into the biography, it was still worth following up, because sometimes you just keep confirming the same information. You go, yeah, 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 I've got it right. But in this case, it just started raising alarm bells. So stay tuned on that one. I don't know what Jones's bio is going to look like. And a couple of the soldiers have particularly interesting stories, life stories, and I just wanted to mention a couple of those. These French was a second lieutenant in the British Royal Air Force, and Sergeant McLaughlin was his observer and gunner. French was the pilot. They died in a plane crash, which wasn't uncommon in the First World War. And because of the nature of the accident and the history of problems with that particular aircraft, their deaths were well written up. They died because the engine fell out of their plane. And so it's really no wonder that the lifespan of pilots in First World War was very short. In fact, I heard it was something like 6 weeks. Private Thorstensen is a Canadian soldier of Icelandic descent. He played hockey for the Winnipeg Falcons just before the war. And the Falcons went on after the war to win the first gold medal in Olympic hockey history. And he was the subject of a Heritage Minute that was on TV. Heather's put out a copy of his article about him that's in the current edition of ACR, is out on the display. You can have a look at the break. And some stories illustrate the rather less than heroic side of the war. The war had probably taken a great toll on Sergeant Kindry. He was a Canadian soldier, and he was part of the Army of Occupation in Bonn in 1919. Perhaps as an escape from the memories of what he'd seen on the battlefield, he engaged in what I think you could just call risky escapist behavior, and he died of cocaine poisoning. And because there was a post-mortem and an investigation of his death, there are a lot of details available about what the events that led up to his death. A very sad story. So as you can see, we get really engaged with our soldiers. So if you're interested in honing your research skills and writing skills, because the two go together, gaining some really interesting, learning some interesting history about World War I, about life at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and something quite a bit more about Canadian-British geography, which I didn't know, you are welcome to join us. It's a great team. We work together. We share resources. We meet occasionally to brainstorm ideas, and it's a great opportunity. I'll just remind you about the list of online resources that is available on the members only, will be available on the members only webpage. We've only put in there online resources because we do almost all our research online. But I will mention also, as a tip, to the nod of my hat to Glenn Wright, who has a very comprehensive and very readable, actually, it's fun to just read, research guide to researching World War I soldiers, and it's a fun book. So if you're interested in helping, please get in touch with me. Sadly, there are a lot of soldiers to go around, so we would be grateful for the help. Thank you. Any